Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I really wanted to do this stream because I knew the YouTube algorithm would absolutely cook me if I attempted to take basically a week off before Dub Dub. That being said, there isn't crazy new stuff today. I know that's like the best way, of course, to gain the attention of viewers. Guys, not that big of a stream, but it actually features a surprisingly large amount of individual news. It's just that those pieces of news are pretty small enough by themselves. We have Riley joining the chat saying hello. We have Steve joining the chat with a generous €6 super chat saying, "Hi, Mark. Hope I can join live on Monday. Had some family stuff come up, so it might get a bit chaotic. Enjoy your dub time." I fully understand that. Not only is my regular timing pretty chaotic, but obviously, whenever family is involved, people around you need help, whatever, that always has priority over any content creation or consumption. So I hope your family is doing well, man. I have some family stuff to deal with myself, but it should not prevent me next week from doing my long promised dub coverage. We also have Steve leaving a message as a 7-month MarkTech Pro Max member saying, "Thanks as always for your coverage." Well, thank you as always for joining. To anybody else, you see, you can leave super chats, super stickers, you can become channel members, Patreon supporters, join me on Discord, on Patreon, whatever. Plenty of ways to interact with me, the community, but of course, just come in, just watch the video, subscribe, like, share, comment. You guys know I love interacting with a lively comment section, getting your agreements, your disagreements. So today's not going to be a super long one, at least I hope not, for the sake of my voice, because I do have a train to catch tomorrow and stuff like that. But I still want to go through everything that is new leading up to Dub, and because I'm not gonna be streaming this weekend, most likely, that's gonna be my last stream before WWDC 2025, and before we officially see iOS 26, macOS 26, iPadOS 26, watchOS 26, tvOS 26, visionOS 26, and potentially homeOS 26. So, and now you see, by the way, it's very easy now to remember the names, the version numbers of the operating systems. Rosa joining the chat. Thank you to anyone who is finding the streams. We've had a lot of new people coming in. We've also had growth in regions that we usually don't perform too well in. So like the videos, that helps a lot, just while I'm live, but also afterwards. Yeah, however you want to. So let's actually start with all the small tidbits of iOS, even like, I guess it's like audio OS in a way, right? I don't know if it has a specific name. I know Apple has like a lightweight operating system for their accessories in a way, AirTags, AirPods, obviously being much more sophisticated than that on top. But AirPods get updated, of course, in lockstep with iOS. Doesn't mean it gains as many features as iOS usually. However, for headphones, the amount of updates that Apple has been able to deliver and the amount of new feature that they've been able to add is really completely unprecedented. It's not just H1 and H2 being powerful, right? But then Apple goes in and specifically optimizes, for example, H2 for even like a kind of medical functionality, like hearing tests and hearing aid features, right? And I just cannot wait until we get H3. My mom wants my old AirPods. She's like rocking some kind of like Android related earbuds that were like free at some point with some kind of promotion. I think they came with like the LG TV that we bought. But she also doesn't want to buy AirPods Pro because I told her, well, AirPods Pro should be close by. She was like, you know what? We're going to just change the ear tips and be fine. Angelica joining the stream, saying I'm she's thanking me for my prepared videos. Well, today's video is much less prepared because I had family stuff, so Steve, I feel with you, and I had work, work. Not always work stuff is work, right? And I actually briefly went to the tech shop to check out if they have Nintendo Switch 2s to try out, but alas, they did not, which I guess makes sense. It is pretty much sold out. Though, up until a day ago, my local shop was actually telling me you could just potentially come in and pick it up, or even get like 2-day delivery, and or even 1-day delivery if you let it like be transported through an Uber driver for $5, which is a pretty good deal. But I'm not really planning on getting a Switch 2. Well, later in the stream, we'll be reacting, I think, to Marquez unboxing a Nintendo Switch 2 system. Down the line, I want to actually see how it compares in terms of performance, potentially versus M1 all the way up to M4 and whatever. But I don't think that that is the kind of coverage that we'll be able to react to today. So before we actually get into these pieces of news, right, plural, I actually wanted to show you two things. First is actually very personal to me because you guys know that I notoriously always show you my piece of crap Logitech case for my iPad Pro. Well, that is not the case anymore. I upgraded, if you want to a Taurus case. I actually was pretty stupid in that regard for a while. I thought they only had an M4 iPad Pro version, but it turned out they had a MacBook Air version, and that MacBook Air version is compatible with my M1 iPad Pro, because most likely I'm not upgrading my iPad Pro till somewhere in the M6 or M7 range. And it's a great case. It's premium plastic, but it's pretty lightweight. It protects the pencil obviously much better. Now that makes it a bit taller, but because it's not very heavy in any way, that's not an issue. You can see it protects all the edges, so it's not like one of those magnetic clip-on things, which there are some good ones like Tiny Owl I've looked into, but it's not really how I want to use my iPad. I want to just throw it in my bag sometimes. And then on the back, of course, you get what Taurus, I believe, does, one of like 2 or 3 companies at the most, which is a dual hinge on the back. So you have basically a kickstand for most of the time for content consumption, and even like if you potentially wanted to put like a wireless keyboard in front of it, and then a smaller kickstand that's specifically designed for drawing. So from what I understand, Taurus is very popular with artists, digital artists, using their Apple Pencils on iPads, and that helps with that. I guess my only criticism is I wish the kickstand was a bit taller. That way your iPad would be able to have much more closer to like a 90-degree angle when it stands, which the Logitech got very close to because it kickstand literally went all the way up there. And I guess I wish it was also a tiny bit wider, because these indentations that you actually see here, they're super comfy to grip. But on the iPad Pro, which is pretty large, that part is pretty far away from your fingers. So yeah, it's not ideal for the 13-inch iPad. I have pretty large hands, not like super long fingers. But yeah, that is kind of my only criticism. Otherwise, for like $40-50, it's really perfect. You can see it stands up quite nicely. Forgive me, the super reflective screen cover on my iPad. Recently bought a 2-pack from JET or JTE. I'm always unsure. And I did not expect it to be quite this reflective. I might buy something else. But actually looking into my favorite brands, for example, like the German-based Smart Engineered, I found out that they also have only super reflective iPad screen protectors, even though they make fantastic low reflective iPhone screen protectors. So you can see how that it stands on the table, and it also even stands, and that's partially good because the kickstand is not actually that tall, but it actually also stands vertically, not just horizontally, and it's even robust enough to even stand on like a relatively soft bed. So I tried it out, how it would look like on my mattress. try to not put my face into the super reflective screen protector. So high recommendation here. This is not in any way sponsored content. I just wanted to mention this. I've also let people know this on Discord. I've shared the images, but yeah, it's been a pretty good investment in my opinion. Down the line, I think, well, since most likely my mom will just take this iPad Pro at some point, this should hold up until that still pretty well for another 2 years or so. Next is actually another photo gallery of mine. As I said, I went to the shop today, checked out the Galaxy S25 Edge because the Nintendo Switch 2 was not available, and my impressions of it are pretty simple. It's an impressively thin product visually. What sticks out to me versus like a fully encased like iPhone 16 Pro Max is more the weight difference. I have to say, like anything under a centimeter thick just doesn't feel thick. What it does though is it looks very impressive in comparison. So this is versus the Galaxy S25 Ultra. What I found fascinating is actually that the S25 Ultra is a decent amount taller, which I didn't expect given that the screen size difference is just 0.2 inches. And yes, I have a burn mark. I'm a good cook, but I always get my hands burned a little bit. Sorry for that. Then you see the dual camera design here. That's actually how I found it. I actually, like from the front, I couldn't tell at all on the Samsung table. And there was somebody in front of them, so I couldn't look at the sheets in front of them, right? So I just went around and looked which one had the new dual camera bump, and it looks good. I do have to say that this is the kind of titanium design that just fundamentally looks a little bit too much like aluminum to me. Like, obviously, I know that the natural titanium on iPhones has the same issue, but I have titanium blue on my 15 Pro Max. And I don't know. Like, I guess titanium and aluminum are just closer visually than like stainless steel is to those materials. And I guess titanium does deliver increased durability. But man, I would just, and I said that in previous streams, I just would have preferred it if this was a slightly thicker product, but it had the same weight because it was made out of aluminum. So the extra thickness would help with structural rigidity rather than titanium. And you could have put in a larger battery, while the lighter weight aluminum would have still kept around the same weight as the thinner titanium. This is how it looks. You see the camera bump gets pretty substantial, but I guess the two-step look here, which kind of turns into a three-step when you include the actual chassis, I guess that helps a little bit. If this was just one big protrusion, it would look a little bit gaudy and a little bit too much. But I wouldn't say it's a bad looking product. It has nice, thin, mostly symmetrical bezels. I think the lowest one, the bottom one, might be a tad bit thicker, but it's not in any way that would be a deal breaker. It's a bright screen. It's decently non-reflective. Obviously not as much as the Galaxy S25 Ultra in any way, but pretty comparable to like the iPhone and like the latest Xiaomi devices, because I tested them out too, just didn't take photos. Didn't think that was very necessary. Yeah, and one last impressions of the thinness. Again, you guys know I have pretty thick fingers, which they're like, what benefits and downsides that can have. Pretty good impression here. A really thin device, but nothing that would make me buy it over like a Galaxy S25 Plus that has better battery life, better sustained performance, a triple camera setup. So while definitely not a bad product, I don't think it's worth the current money. If this was like an €800 device, I think I could somewhat stomach that, but anything over 1,000 just becomes ridiculous. 1,100 just becomes insulting. So I hope Samsung really finds some way to either make this a much better product in the future or substantially reduce its price point. Um, or they'll just cancel it because it didn't sell too well. They'll just say, oh, the next flip is actually kind of like our new Galaxy Edge because the new one is a little bit thinner and it actually has a larger battery. And I would be like, okay, whatever. Like this really only exists because the iPhone Air will exist later in the year. This is no other justification to exist in the lineup. I looked at the prices of like some of the Xiaomi products next to it, and knowing that many of them have like way larger batteries, even like over the Galaxy S25 Ultra. So just seeing that, like I know thinness, lightness can impress, and like for example on the M4 iPad Pro, that's really striking because you also get a product that's still in many ways superior to what else you can find in the industry. Like you literally have to move up to like an HX like 390 processor to substantially beat what the M4 delivers, and you literally have no screen that competes on the same level as the tandem OLED screen, and that's over a year after launch. And there's also no tablet that gives you quite the same speaker system as the iPad Pro, and this does none of that in the smartphone market. And it's also like even worse priced, I would argue. While yes, the iPad Pro is more expensive than other tablets, it is also a more premium tablet in general. While this is more expensive while being worse in many ways. Yeah, that's about it for my own like little safari that I provided to you here. That's like the giraffes I found along the way. Let's actually focus on the last minute WWDC 2025 leaks that we are getting. So some stuff exclusive that 9to5Mag found, and just like a broad onslaught of like leakers trying to get some relevance before the event. I guess it also becomes much more likely that things leak right before it. I guess maybe engineers fear retribution a little bit less at this time of year, now that it's like 3 days before Dub Dub. So let's start actually with new AirPods features. So you should note, of course, AirPods, as I said before, have been updated a lot in the last few years, especially AirPods Pro 2, and there are a couple of features coming specifically to products that seemingly are H2 based. So first it starts with new head gestures, which of course you know have been introduced not too long ago specifically for accepting or disregarding phone calls, right? Nod or shake your head, makes sense. And now AirPods Pro and AirPods 4 are supposedly gonna get new head gestures, including extending a conversation awareness volume adjustment before returning users to their original noise control setting. So that's what Apple is working on. Currently, you can enter conversation awareness volume adjustment by pressing and holding on the AirPod stem or swiping up on the stem, but soon a head gesture might also do the trick. My question is what gesture that would be? Right, because this is such an it's not a niche feature, because anybody who's used conversation awareness, I always turn it off. I just prefer to be either in full-on transparency mode or in full-on noise cancellation. Like I always wear my AirPods mostly in just 1 year, so I'm never fully disconnected from the environment. But I'm just really interesting here, like this is such a, how would you even know to do this? I mean, I guess AirPods would explain that to you when after an update, but I always find like these are things that are almost impossible to remember, because now it would be, oh, you're in a conversation, right? So you have like a human in front of you. Now your AirPods are trying to adjust the volume, but maybe you still want them in your ear, and you still want even music in one ear. What gesture do you do? First of all, that seems somewhat natural, right? So it's easy to remember. but then that's also not weird inside the conversation, right? I understand this will be fully optional, so it's good to have this rather than not have this, but I much prefer to just do it with a tap, because at least that person knows, oh, I'm actually interacting with my AirPods. Imagine if you started like shaking your head or nodding, or I don't know, doing some diagonal movement while being in a conversation with a person. Next is sleep auto pause. This is also a feature I'm not interested in. Because when I fall asleep with an AirPod in my ear, I actually do like the volume to keep playing, because, well, that's kind of why I put it there. I know I might not necessarily wake up when the sound goes away, but I do prefer the sound to just still be there. Usually I don't need that, because I'll just put my iPad next to myself. Or I'll sleep next to another person, at which point it's easy to sleep. It's just sleeping alone that can be stupid. Yeah, many people tend to fall asleep with their earpods on. This is interesting. This is like a philosophical debate. Are your AirPods on you, or are they in you? I would prefer in, I guess. The head gestures of straight up telling people to go away. Yeah, it's like... oh, hi, right? And conversation awareness immediately jumps in, and you're like, oh, hi. They're like, okay, dude, take it easy. Luckily, our sources say Apple has been working on detecting when a user is falling asleep while wearing their AirPods and automatically pausing playback. This is interesting because there are states like between being fully awake and between being asleep that I genuinely wouldn't like my auditory environment around me to change. So I guess current AirPods don't like have a heart rate sensor. So I mean during sleep your heart rate goes down, but what does that mean when you like have a busy dream and your heart rate goes back up? Does it then like start playing again? It's also not clear if this will work with the Apple Watch, that obviously has much better awareness if you're sleeping or not. So the way this is going to be implemented, I assume, is going to be mostly machine learning based, or maybe based on pairing with your Apple Watch. And I'm one of those people who does not wear his Apple Watch to bed. I didn't do it with my Series 4 either, but sometimes I didn't mind falling asleep with it. On my AirPods my AirPods Pro Ultra, Jesus, what was going wrong with my brain? But on my Apple Watch Ultra, no way, Jose, I'm falling asleep with this monstrosity. I love it. It's brutalist, it's cool, its battery is long lasting, its performance is impeccable, its display is super bright, the digital crown is big, and the haptic feedback is amazing. I have all the buttons I need. Hell, even the speakers and mics are pretty great. But I'm not falling asleep with it. So, yeah, two features that are definitely not bad to have, but two features that I'll definitely be turning off. And next we come to a feature that I'll definitely have enabled, and that is camera control. Apple is finally poised to allow for AirPods camera control, like with the old earbuds. Yep, because with this you can actually, because it's just like regular volume up, volume down button, the same way that like your volume up, volume down buttons work in the camera app. They work on the old earbuds, but now this feature might finally come to the AirPod stem. While touching one's ear, not year, in every remotely taken photo might look weird. I do hope Apple supports this feature, even if the user is just casually holding one AirPod. I would mention one thing, which is this needs to be connected to a timer feature. So once you click it on the AirPod, it should like have a 3-second timer, maybe like a customizable timer, right? So you click it and then you put your hand away, because obviously this would look weird, right? If that was like you in imagine in every photo from now on, right? Let's say you always have the best camera phone, right? And you have the remote control. This is usually my task, right? Because I have the Apple Watch, but the Apple Watch does have like a timer to take a photo. This needs to have some kind of like time offset. And next is audio mix. Last year, Apple introduced the audio mix alongside iPhone 16, which uses machine learning to identify and separate background elements from speech and lets you choose from 3 voice options: in-frame, studio, and cinematic. Now, 95Mac has learned that Apple has been developing a similar studio quality mic mode for AirPods, turning them into a strong competitor in the creator-led mic market. No, it won't. The mics just simply aren't large enough. However, I do wonder what kind of features Apple will offer, because I feel like there's a difference between the audio mix features and just higher quality audio capture. Like, for example, the iPhone 16s have 4 microphones rather than 3, to have better separation of all those incoming noises, but also just in general for higher quality. So I wonder what they would be doing here with AirPods specifically. Simply, like, they do have microphones, and several of them, like internal and external, and obviously on both AirPods simultaneously. So I guess that could offer more data to work with. But then I really wonder, like just the physical size of the microphones and stuff like that. Will Apple actually go all out and even allow you to have those kinds of audio mix different modes? It would be definitely cool to try out, though it definitely will not convince me to turn away from my more professional mic setup. Riley, I wonder if it's going to be AirPods 7 or 26 OS. I don't like AirPods don't really like have like a name like for their operating system. They get like firmware versions, right? And those have like very weird numbering, which I guess is just based on how long Apple has been updated. What's the latest AirPods firmware, for example, right now? Latest AirPods Pro firmware, right? That's firmware 6F21 or 7E93. So I guess now we would be in the 8s. I didn't even know we jumped to 7, I guess. And then, of course, it also depends on like the specific model you're on. Yeah, so in that regard, I don't think that of all the things AirPods need in terms of like software updates, a different naming for those updates are my least concern. If anything, I would be more interested in having an easier way to upgrade AirPods software, right? To install software updates. So it's not depending on like, oh, AirPods are charging, iPhone are charging, both have enough battery. It's been enough time since like you last turned them on, so AirPods know, oh, might actually have some time off, the person is sleeping or whatever, right? And then your phone will just start streaming that new version to your AirPods. That's not a great solution. It works for me. Like I'll even like open up the case before I go to sleep once and stuff like that. But like, it shouldn't be necessary. It should just be in settings. I mean, you can manually update your Apple Watch, which works on device already, but you can even do that through the Apple Watch app on iPhone. So why not just allow that on for AirPods too? And I mean like for AirPods TOO, not TWO. And last, and for me least, but I guess that could be interesting for people who have some kind of like group workflow, including AirPods, is called wider classroom support. Apple has been working on a feature aimed at improving the pairing experience in shared iPads, which will be especially welcome in classrooms where multiple students use the same device. The goal is to streamline so it's not multiple, well, it is multiple AirPods, but like connected to potentially one product. The goal is to streamline how AirPods connect to iPadOS in these settings, likely with less friction and fewer manual steps. As always, Apple may choose to delay or tweak some of these features. Makes sense. That is a good caveat to always mention. Which interestingly, like in the last few years, we actually had like explicitly like portions of dub dedicated to AirPods new features and software. So I guess if there are so many features, even if none of them individually might be like my cup of tea specifically, except for camera control, I think it's pretty cool if Apple continues to talk about it. Plus, Apple keeps talking a lot about health during dub, whether that's like the hearing aid features and hearing test stuff that Apple has introduced to AirPods recently. Hopefully, they do more of this in the future. So there is an opportunity here to kind of like do several things at once so people don't get bored of like, oh my god, we just talked about iOS redesign, please get us quicker to macOS. And instead we might be like wasting time with AirPods. But if there's actually so much to talk about it, I wouldn't be against it. They do have a system. The 7 is the major yearly version, then the later changes when every few month version drops. Yeah, I know. Every firmware gets like successively updated, but I'm just not sure if they will ever call it its own operating system, right? You know what I mean? Because they are like, you can argue if Apple Watch is an accessory, but an Apple Watch in theory works perfectly by itself. Apple, like the fact that they need to be paired to an iPhone is very, very arbitrary in a way. Now, that grants them a lot of extra functionality, but it's not technically needed, especially on the cellular models. AirPods are an accessory, so yeah, I guess Apple is fine to just calling their OS by like this firmware version. But I guess in that way, they could move it up to 26. Which would at that point also be, I guess, easier to understand, right? Because you would be like, oh, there's this new AirPods 26.1 version. And but I guess Apple also doesn't update all AirPods simultaneously, quite the same way they do iPhones. So maybe that's also a reason for them to stick with this different approach. But next is actually an operating system that definitely will be called 26, and that is visionOS 26, gaining full support for PlayStation, Xbox, and other spatial controllers. It should be noted there is no current Xbox spatial controller of any kind. I wonder what that means for like Meta Quest controllers potentially and other PC VR accessories. My expectation is that PlayStation will be the premier feature here. The Sense controllers from the PSVR 2 are fantastic. As you guys know, I have a PSVR 2. I don't use it too much these days because next to work, streaming, personal life, workout schedule, and everything, I just often get like light headaches that would be made way worse by like an hour in virtual reality. But it's definitely something that I encourage people to look into and get it, especially now that PSVR 2 has gotten cheaper. Of course, Apple Vision Pro already supports traditional controllers. Now it's for spatial controllers. Should be noted, and we have a longtime viewer of the channel, Jimmy James, coming. We have a new viewer with a similar name. We have Jimmy James, and I think the new guy is Jonathan James. Trying to just be an attentive. I try to remember the people who comment, so that's an extra encouragement for you to comment. But Jimmy James pointed out how Sony and Apple are seemingly working on something deep with each other. Something that seems to be a little bit more involved than just Bluetooth compatibility. So yeah, you can check out the Discord where those discussions are being had. But yeah, this is fascinating because obviously some games just need better controllers, and honestly, like, than just hand controls in virtual reality. Riley saying becoming a family channel. Yeah, like, yeah, next year all of you are gonna start calling me Oni-chan, right? It's like I'm gonna be your big bro. We're just gonna be one big happy anime family. Jesus, I'm so stupid. Um, but yeah, get there, check out the Discord, consider getting PSVR 2, and consider what it, of course, means that controllers might not come to to Apple Vision Pro, specifically controllers that are designed for virtual reality. This to me bodes really well, not actually for the current Apple Vision Pro, but I think Apple Vision Pro 2 or whatever, or M5 based Apple Vision Pro should have a really, really good start, because at that point, it will have a decent amount of software support, even just from the more iOS, iPadOS like games that have been ported. It's now like it's gonna have a performance advantage that's absolutely like unmatched in the industry. Like we talked about recently, how the chip that is going into Samsung's project Muhan virtual headset has less multi-core performance, at least in Geekbench, because I assume some power of the chip is just always blocked for the augmented reality features, right? But it has less multi-core performance than DM2 offers in terms of single core performance, right? So 2500 versus around 2600. And now you can imagine with M4 being roughly in the 3700 range, and M5 definitely going over 4000, just like what a completely ludicrous comparison we'll be looking at. Yeah. And hopefully this also comes maybe in some way before the latest version, because like if it is just Bluetooth support for an already existing controller, I just struggle to see why Apple would push it like for another 2-3 months, right? Just launch it if it is ready. Right, launch it like in June or July. Make it part of Vision OS 2.5 or whatever, right? But hey, who knows? Maybe it's a deeper thing than one assumes. It's also most likely that Apple is working on the gaming app for Apple Vision OS as well. It's not actually rumored for Vision OS. It's currently rumored for iPhone, iPad, Mac, and Apple TV. But I assume it will also make sense down the road on Apple Vision Pro. But I assume that if Apple makes a specific gaming app for Vision Pro that also integrates a store specifically designed for games, that store is going to be very much designed in mind with the idea of putting virtual reality games front and center. So yeah, and of course maybe that store could also focus on like, oh, these games work with hand control, these games have optional controller support, these games need spatial controllers, right? All those kinds of settings that will make it easier to know what kind of game you're buying. I think that will make a dedicated gaming app really shine on the Apple Vision OS. Next are a few like quick shot small features. First is iOS 26 getting new features in the messaging app. So translation, I assume AI-based translation, Apple Intelligence-based translations will be integrated right into the Messages app. We've already seen Google do stuff like this. So if you are communicating in one of the languages that is supported, they will be translated right in the Messages app. I hope Apple has a nice interface here, one that also, of course, lets you easily see like the original text, potentially also lets you choose a different language. Maybe the auto detect was a little bit off or something like that. But it's definitely useful. To me, I would actually like to, like, because as you guys know, I'm from Moldova. My native language is Russian. So sometimes I type with people who still prefer Russian. I cannot type in Russian for shit. I speak Russian very well, but I write it like a 6-year-old child. So in that regard, I usually dictate my Russian messages to those people. So potentially, this would just allow me to keep using German or English, and it would just be translated for those people, which is great. Hopefully, one thing that I would love to see is also if it would allow me to translate something right away. So maybe if the other person doesn't have like an Apple Intelligence ready iPhone or whatever, that I can translate it before sending it to them without having to go to like the translate app. I know there are some ways to do this, but like something that's really easy to understand, really well integrated into the Messages app. So small stuff, definitely. It's a big thing, but it's small to me because it's just something that has been done before, but it is going to benefit a lot of people, as a lot of people will have Apple Intelligence ready iPhones by the time iOS 26 rolls around. And of course, with so many people using Messages, either for SMS, RCS, or most likely iMessage, this will be a benefit to a lot of people. The other feature is also going to be integration with polls. So if you just want to say, for example, hey guys, I have like 3 restaurants that we could go to, right? Let's say you're doing it in a group chat. Like here are the 3 options. Everybody like comments which version they want usually, but now they could even like fill out the poll, or basically just tap on the version they like the best. This feature has already existed in WhatsApp and Telegram, so this would be a good example of Apple copying something that really needs to be copied. It's a really good feature. It's something that back in the day when I was still on Twitter, I used to use. So it's definitely been a pretty big part of like social media in general and communication apps. So this is something that Apple definitely needs. Now, if this is the entire list of changes, I could be a bit disappointed. There are still things from apps like Telegram that I think Apple needs to copy, but I guess it's better to get something rather than nothing, which is always my stance on like the long discussed like volume control panel, right? One that would allow you to choose: are you actually customizing your volume for your system, for your notifications, for your media, right? All that stuff that has been figured out in Android and Windows and Linux and by default, right? I know on macOS there are some fantastic apps that allow you to do that, but you need to buy them. Like some of them are like $20 or more. And there are some free versions, but they are very basic. And then there's obviously nothing for that on iOS and iPadOS, where you cannot really install those kinds of like system changing things as you can on macOS. So this is definitely something that Apple would need to work on. But I always appreciate anything new in terms of audio control, right? Like at least that you can go into settings and choose like your maximum like notification volume, and you can set it that won't be changed, right? So if you change like your media volume with your buttons, you know that like your notification volume will not change with that. I appreciate having that. I would love to have it just in Control Center and having much more insight into other volume things in the system, including just being able to turn it off for certain apps. But I'll take what I can get, and the same attitude goes for the Messages app here. The other feature is completely like something that I don't use, but hey, Apple Notes is expected to gain support for exporting in Markdown, which I had no idea what the Markdown format was. But I guess it's like it's a light. Oh, I'll just read it out for you because it's way better than I can give you as an explanation after only reading up on it like 5 minutes before the stream. Angelica commented in the beginning of the stream about how well prepared I am. Well, not enough to do like a deep dive on the Markdown format. But Markdown is a lightweight markup language that some writers prefer to use over rich text. Rather than using HTML for bold, italic, links, and headers, Markdown uses quick character shortcuts like bold or like star bold star or hashtag header. Okay, so I guess that's quicker. Like, I guess you can type how you want to change the thing to look. It sounds like the feature will only add support for exporting text with Markdown formatting. Oh, and not writing in Markdown directly. So that's if you import some kind of like text file into your notes. I assume this would then go beyond the Apple Notes app. I assume this would also make then sense for like Apple Pages and Keynote and whatever. But yeah, the fact that it's not going to be integrating into the app, again, this means absolutely nothing to me. I would never use stuff like this. I would just prefer to have a visual interface next to me. And this is where a widescreen, like on the Mac, really comes handy because you basically can have your note and then you have like a system panel for like your fonts, your font size, your bold italics underline control, right? Your color changes. So I wouldn't have to do those things as those kinds of like commands, I guess. Maybe I'm getting this wrong. This sounds pretty niche. It's interesting that anybody at Apple cares about stuff like that. I guess maybe some specific developer just made it their passion project to integrate it. But then maybe they said, oh, how about we like also make that work inside the Notes app? And Apple was like, yeah, that's just going to confuse people. If they accidentally type in something like that and that happens, they'll just flip out. No, at least not this year. Maybe if this gets more popular down the line. But for now, seemingly, that's just a feature for imported text files. And the last WWDC related leak is, of course, you know that in the Apple Music app, there's animated artwork. It's pretty beautiful, pretty lightweight on the system. Even if you choose to run your screen on, it's not just gonna like run down your battery. And supposedly these will now expand to the lock screen. Again, it makes sense that such a feature would eventually like come to something else. Gonna be interesting to see the way it's integrated, for example, into the always on display. I mean, the always on display has some abilities to update itself, but I wonder if Apple will see that as worth the battery impact. Yeah. Interesting. The rumored feature would expand on recent changes in the lock screen Now Playing view. Currently, maximized album artwork from the Now Playing widget tints the entire interface, true, creating a more immersive experience when controlling music playback. iOS 26 appears set to take that concept further by introducing animated artwork that fills the entire lock screen. So that's also interesting. So you basically wouldn't have, potentially, I guess, like your square, right? Just on your lock screen with the artwork and it potentially being animated, but it would be full screen, or I assume enough of the screen, like, because imagine how silly it would be. Let's say it even has a 19.5 by 9 aspect ratio, which it most likely will not, right? But still a part would be cut off by all of these controls. A part would be just like also the your calendar, your clocks, whatever, right? So I assume it would be just borderless, but not full screen. That's my prediction, I guess. I mean, that kind of goes against what they're saying, but my predictions are usually not too far off because my predictions are based what Apple does. I mean, they could, for example, with all of their masking tools and whatever, they could potentially integrate stuff like your clock still into the artwork. though that would be a little bit disrespectful, in my opinion, to the people designing the artwork, especially now that it's like so much more effort with it being animated. But I just don't see Apple like allowing the controls to actually like hover over the artwork. That just seems very anti-Apple to me. Like we've talked about in previous streams, how Apple is the company that marries technology and liberal arts, and I think that would be putting technology firmly over liberal arts. Yeah, that's about it. I think for any kind of software rumors, I guess Apple Watch just got the Snapchat app. I don't think there's anything new in terms of like what is expected at DubDub. I mean, we covered so much already, and I'm not going to give you full-on summaries because we are just 3 days away, right? I feel like me going through a long list of everything that's coming during DubDub is just going to be distracting at this point, especially since we just mentioned new stuff. You guys see, I love interacting to stuff in depth, so that would just mean us spending too much time on this. There is one hardware-related rumor, and it's coming from 91 Mobiles, saying they have detected that there are new, basically MagSafe pucks in the words from Apple, and that they would be compliant with Qi 2.2, which is the latest standard by the Wireless Power Consortium, and that standard supposedly gives you up to 50 watts of wireless charging directly as part of Qi 2. I know some products out there have like really fast 50, 60 watt wireless charging. Those are usually the devices that give you like 90, 100 watts of wire charging, but that would be Apple doing it, right? So there's filing reveals 2 new MagSafe charger models, which I guess just means different lengths, right? A3503 and A3502, because the MagSafe puck is connected to the cable here. I've always wondered if it would be better for durability. Well, for longevity, I think it would be best if it had a USB-C port inside, right? But I think for durability, like let's say you don't necessarily plan on breaking this cable, but just for the fact that you are gonna likely bend this cable a lot right around the port, it's probably best that it just like smoothly goes into the product, right? I mean, these aren't cheap chargers, so I guess it would kind of be good to disconnect the cost of the charging puck from the cost of the cable, but that's currently how Apple approaches it. It's one of my favorite charging systems of all time. I've talked about in previous streams how I consider MagSafe one of the most innovative new smartphone features. It's not that new anymore, but like all of the last years, right? At this point, it's like 5-6 years since the iPhone 12, so it's been a while, but yeah, it still is fantastic, and I'm still pretty outraged that most Android vendors cannot be bothered to implement Qi 2 directly into the product, by which I don't mean compliance with Qi 2, like charging, voltage, and speed, and whatever, but the actual magnets. Most of them make those magnets part of a case, and that's just not the same experience. But this, as you can see here, would support up to 15 volts at 3 amperes, which, if you know how wattage is calculated, that would mean it goes up to 45 watts. Now the standards goes up to 50. I assume that Apple would like technically be compliant. I mean, it's the same thing as we have with the latest USB-C standards, right? Technically, USB-C goes all the way up to 240 watts, but Apple's highest watt charger is 140, but it's still actually, at least when it came out, it was on the latest version of the standard. So just being on the latest version does not mean you have to support the highest possible charging speed. Obviously, there is currently no iPhone that supports those kinds of charging speeds. They currently max out at 25 watts on the on the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro series. So previously, they maxed out at 15 watts up until the iPhone 15 series. That would be this 5 watts times 3 amperes makes 15 watts. And then roughly 25 watts is this 9 watts times 3 amperes makes 27 watts. So consider that your phone, because of cooling, will not charge most of the time at the maximum speed anyway. Plus, of course, the phone can gatekeep how much performance it takes in, how much wattage it takes in. Yeah, 27 watts, pretty close to the standard. And I guess this being a 45 watt charging speed could also mean that Apple more optimizes it for 40 watts or 35 watts, right? So just looking at this standard, right, there is a decent chance here that Apple doesn't give you the full 45 watts and definitely not the full 50 watts of the standard on your iPhone 17. Now, could also be for later products. Who knows? There have been rumors that Apple could bring some kind of MagSafe support to the iPad as well. So maybe that's more for that, though that hasn't really been rumored in years. For a while, people thought that Apple might bring like a glass Apple logo on the AirPod, on the iPad. Apple kind of did the opposite and made it copper. But as far as I understand, copper would actually allow for wireless charging. So that's a little, depending on how deeply it's integrated into like the charging, the wireless charging coil there. So yeah. Actually, not sure about this, but I assume that this is for iPhones. Going to be very interesting to see. Maybe that's just a prototype Apple worked on, and it actually doesn't make it to final production. But it's pretty cool that we get this. And hey, they even got photos of it, which is pretty cool. In addition to faster charging, Qi 2.2 offers improved magnetic alignment and charging efficiency compared to its predecessor. The standard also features backward compatibility with older Qi chargers. I guess magnetic alignment has been the least of Apple's issues for all those years. I mean, they are the pioneer of combining wireless charging with magnets. Charging efficiency will be interesting because obviously the more wattage you pump in, the more heat gets generated, and that means a lot more heat gets also lost in the charging process. So it gets less and less efficient the more wattage you're playing with. So hopefully this is not going to be totally inefficient. Now, I'm not too worried because smartphones don't consume too much power. The energy I use at home is green energy. That doesn't mean I should be wasteful with it, but in a world where like a fridge will use more energy than your Mac, your iPhone, your iPad, your Apple Watch, your AirPods, and probably your gaming console combined through all times, especially since it's basically always working, it's not really the biggest thing, right? Even if 20% of the energy are lost, that's still somewhat acceptable to me. If we were talking about the power needed for like a Mac and whatever, that would be different because that's a lot more power, at least per charge of device. But this is interesting, and this would actually get me to buy this. When Apple switched to the braided cable, I finally became interested in the product, and to the 2-meter braided cable. Sorry, but before Apple had done this, there was already a Belkin MagSafe charger. It goes only up to 15 watts, but that's really not an issue to me given that I only have a 15 Pro Max. But it also has a little kickstand. So if I put it on there, I can actually keep watching something on my iPhone or whatever. Plus, it's very easy to just have one MagSafe charger at home. Like my mom, for example, when she visits, she has an iPhone 13 Pro Max. That one is based on Lightning, but instead of keeping like Lightning cables around the house, I just have that Belkin cable connected. It's 2 meters long. She just picks it up, puts it on her phone, boom, doesn't need to carry cables and chargers whenever she visits me. Because I honestly don't have a single long lightning cable at home. The only one I have left is like the USB-A based lightning charger, lightning cable that was for my old Power Beats. So yeah, I systematically gave away my lightning cables, or some of them just stopped working, or they just look like they shouldn't be used. So yeah, MagSafe, cool solution. Hopefully Apple actually pulls ahead with in terms of charging speed support. What's interesting to me here is if the iPhone, let's say out of the 45 watts that this is capable of, the iPhone gives you 40 watts, right? That would be weird then if it in wire charging, which loses less energy and therefore generates less heat, if it wasn't like 50 watts. There has been the report from Jeff Poo saying the iPhone charges at 35 watts. So maybe, and that is now again very speculative, maybe wired and wireless charging will be the same speed at now 35 watts. This would give it actually room to lose roughly 20% of the power that's being delivered to the puck. So from 45 watts down to 35. And then in wire charging, I guess you could more comfortably achieve those 35 watts with less heat, longer sustained peaks and stuff like that. Wouldn't be as big of an improvement over the current 25 watts wireless and roughly 27, 29 watts wire charging. But I guess it would still be something if it was fully sustained. One thing I wouldn't like if Apple was still like, oh, it's 35 watts. I mean, Apple doesn't talk about it, but I guess it's just like what the device is like specified for. When you look at like the official spec sheet that they have to disclose to countries like China, and it's 35 watts, but really it sustains only 27 watts, and only that for a short period of time. After that, it drops to 22 watts and then to 18 and stuff like that. So yikesy, right? If really Apple really underuses this. But I am trying to be a little bit more realistic and a little bit more skeptical, so you guys don't build up false hope potentially. Yeah, but that's about it for the Apple rumors. I mean, that's still about an hour's worth of Apple rumors, which is kind of more than I expected when I initially planned out the video. But I would like to react to some Nintendo Switch 2 stuff. I wanted to do it today as basic as possible, and what is more basic than Marquez reacting to gaming stuff? He obviously is not a big gamer himself. I did not want to go to like IGN or like a Super Nintendo specific website like Nintendo Life. Also websites that I would usually look for like very in-depth content like Digital Foundry. They thus far have not provided new big videos on the Switch 2. I guess they are running a big stream right now, but that's really not the kind of content I react to, like a live reaction to a live video. But this should be interesting. I actually haven't watched it in full. I saw Marquez being called out for being a little bit awkward when it comes to talking about gaming tech. I saw one chatter saying that he looks as if he's forced to do these videos at gunpoint. Let's actually go with some nice speed, 1.15. I don't know if I will have to pause this video a lot, if there are any factual inaccuracies. Hopefully we'll get through it in around half an hour, and then I'll be able to chill out, have my long weekend, and then I'll be in full force back on Monday. Of course, while we're reacting to this, please, if you haven't yet done so, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it, and comment. You guys see I love interacting with your comments, getting your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements. Let me know if you yourself plan on buying a Switch 2, or if you yourself like have gotten at least to try one, which I didn't. So yeah, plenty of stuff to discuss.
All right.
I don't need
It's finally
captions.
here. Nintendo sent this box over, and inside this box
What's in the
is
box,
our Nintendo
Marcus?
Switch 2. It's our $449 Nintendo Switch 2. Actually, there's a bunch of stuff in this box. There is the Nintendo Switch 2 plus the Mario Kart World Bundle. That's $499. There's also a Switch 2 camera in here, which is $55. There's also a Switch 2 Pro controller.
So the accessories went up in
$85.
price
and there's a physical
because
copy
of
of Mario
the
Kart
tariffs,
World,
I guess.
which
That's
would
at
be
least
$80
currently
if you
the
got one, which we'll
explanation.
need to play today because the digital
But they
copy
only
doesn't work
went
until
up by like
tomorrow. So,
$5
that's the
or
price of the
so.
box, but let's just jump in. With none other than our Ridge MKBHD knife, of course. Oh, and also,
Yay,
by the way, you noticed I have
self-promotion.
over here a Switch 1 and a Switch 1 OLED, because I've gotten to compare, like,
Cool look, by the way. I like that his knife isn't like matte black everything, which I kind of expected him to go with. I love this white and black look. That's why I love the look of my PS5, PS5 Pro, my DualSense controller, my PSVR 2 and whatever. I think it also looks dope on the Switch OLED. It's one thing that always confuses me about Marquez with his, like, he bought specifically the Midnight Black Apple Watch Ultra right after having the original natural titanium one, which is fine, but he rocks it with like a very dark band, which I'm like, no, at that point, bro, especially you have dark skin. Look at how great you look in a white t-shirt, right? It would look similarly great. Like, I'm a white guy. I cannot pull off white clothes as great as Marquez here. Granted, he's also an athlete, so it's gonna look better on him than me. But yeah, I have to wear dark stuff to contrast my milky white aristocratic skin.
like
No,
back
I'm actually pretty tan for like, I have Mediterranean roots, but I still like white people jokes.
and forth between seeing one and seeing the other, but I want to look at them next to each other. So let's jump in. Here's the Switch 2 Pro controller.
So the Switch, I'll guess because I probably know like 10 times what Marquez knows about this. I don't get why Nintendo keeps refusing to bring back analog triggers on the back to the Nintendo systems. They had that all the way back in the GameCube era, as far as I understand. And I had hoped that it would be at least one differentiating feature between the Switch 1 and Switch 2. But even with the Pro controller, the next gen Pro controller, at $85, which is about the price of a DualSense, which has also microphones, gyroscopes. I'm not sure if this one has a gyroscope. It probably should, given that it's like, because the Switch itself has one. But the DualSense has microphones, speakers, it has advanced haptics. It doesn't just have analog triggers, but it has adaptive analog triggers on the back. So, yeah, it's really a shame because that now leaves both Nintendo and Xbox with like firmly inferior controllers, in my opinion. Like, at least technologically, you can argue which one is like more comfortable to you. Maybe you specifically love the D-pad on like your Nintendo systems, but it's just such a shame.
Switch 2.
Yeah. Also, no color choices, unfortunately. I guess this is for logistical purposes, but the original Switch launched in a gray aesthetic similar to this, and a blue and red or orange, I guess, Joy-Con version. So that's actually the one you see here on the side from him, right? Nintendo sort of combined those options.
Here's the Switch 2 Mario
and
Kart
now
World.
just
There it is.
offers these colors like it's a subtle shade under your joystick. So that's a bit. Also, you don't really have an aesthetic choice when it comes to the stand. Granted, in the box, that makes sense. I wish that for the enthusiast, like there was like at least a white Switch dock or something like that, similar to what the OLED model had.
This.
So the games, I'll also have my part to say about it once he unboxes the game.
Switch 2 camera.
Yeah, $55 camera. Oh, that's like, what, 720p? Like, I know they have a 480p camera that's like a child's toy, basically. It is nicely compatible with USB-C cameras in general. No, I'm not sure like whether it will find drivers for all of them, but if you have a simple USB camera, your Switch should support it. So I really don't recommend getting the Nintendo one, especially like I know if you're just gonna put it like next to your TV, you probably don't want to waste money on making it super expensive. But like this camera is crap from everything that I've seen.
And of course, a little bit of extra information. They always give us a little PDF so we know what's going on. But that's it. So of course, first we should get into the console itself. That's all anyone's.
That's the exact opposite of how everyone else handles this because they want to leave the best for last. But okay, Marquez.
For anyway, so there you go. That's the box you're gonna see in stores and Best Buy and everything. There they are, right on top.
So one negative thing, well, one positive thing at first, because I don't want to be an asshole. This is a very compact box, which obviously goes hand in hand with this being a handheld. See what I did there? It is a bit bad, in my opinion, just how plastic ridden it is. And I don't even want to compare this to my experience with PlayStation. PlayStation actually gives you pretty cheap boxes because there are a lot of recycled materials inside and stuff like that. So I get, but there's no premium nature to this. I think the one company that has nailed this in terms of consoles would have actually been Xbox with their packaging for the Xbox Series X. But I guess Microsoft at this point really, really feels bad about giving anything premium to the Series X because that just meant they kept losing more and more money per console. Just saving $1 more on packaging and whatever, just saving a little bit more money by not going with this weird dual board design with like a motherboard and a daughter board, having this split memory setup. It's just like Nintendo is going very plasticky, so not super environmentally friendly, but at least they're going compact and they're going somewhat cheap, so they don't have to offload the cost of packaging literally onto you.
Big new Joy-Cons.
Which, like, poor Marquez, right? Sometimes he unboxes, like, some of the most premium things imaginable, like the Pro Display XDR packaging. Do you remember just how, and the Mac Pro packaging, do you remember just how crazy, like, finely made those boxes are? And now this. So this is also the hint of color that we get. That blue and, in my opinion, orange that gets preserved. I guess it's like neon red and neon blue, but yeah, this is still orange to me.
And then, of course, the console itself. Right here. It looks a little bigger every time I see it. Nice big 7.9-inch screen, thin bezels.
Not as thin as I would like it to be after, of course, the Switch OLED had already trimmed down the bezels. But yeah, it's not bad.
Pretty sleek.
You have the kickstand, which again is also a thing that is not really improved. In fact, it's actually somewhat downgraded over the Switch OLED. The Switch OLED has a very like robust kickstand that goes basically across the entire back, not just in width but also in height. But obviously to preserve more internal space, to not make this product even more large, because just of the kickstand now, they like made this kickstand a nice U shape.
Go. USB-C port on top. Got those pins on the side. We'll talk more about those in a second. But yeah, that's the console right there. But what else comes in this box here? HDMI cable, nice. And then of course your two attachments for the Joy-Cons and the wrist straps.
So with the HDMI cable, I'm not sure if it's a full enabled HDMI 2.1 cable that goes up to like 48 gigabits per second. But like this console generation has been a little weird when it comes to the full support for the HDMI standard. So Xbox has a bit more bandwidth on its HDMI port than Sony. They go up to 40 gigabits per second, and that technically allows you to have like higher bit rates during a 4K 120. But then system-wide, Xbox actually makes it a real pain to switch between like 4K 60 and 4K 120. And Sony gives you 32 gigabits per second, so that makes it more reliant on display stream compression for 4K 120. But its 4K 120 mode is actually really well made, like it's automatic. The other downside of the PlayStation systems has been that their VRR window, variable refresh rate, adaptive refresh rate, whatever you want to call it, goes down to 48 hertz or 48 FPS, while Xbox goes down to 40. So technically, if your game drops down under 48 FPS on a Sony system, then you could be experiencing screen tearing. On the Xbox, you wouldn't, unless it drops down to under 40. Then there's also like low frame rate compensation, which can help, and certain games do, but that's a little bit more complicated. On the Switch, we do get the lowest bandwidth of all those ports, 24 gigabits per second, but it completely gets rid of 4K 120 support. So it maxes out at 4K 60 or 1080p 120. That should make it pretty finicky to choose the modes. Because as far as I know, it just won't automatically change if you change it in like your game. Maybe that could happen with like a first party Nintendo game, but I'm really not sure. It's definitely not as automatically solved as PlayStation. So it has the lowest bandwidth, even though it comes out like almost 5 years later than those consoles. But even worse, it doesn't actually support VRR on TVs. So the internal screen goes up to 120 hertz and it has VRR. In fact, it does have a Nintendo-based GPU, so I assume it has either something that's like roughly based on G-Sync or full on G-Sync for the internal screen. But because the controller, like your HDMI controller, I believe it's a MediaTek chip, it's pretty not so great. You're not getting the same functionality on an external TV, at least for now. I assume they'll try to find some solution for it. So while 24 gigabits per second, or 27, I'm not sure, but it's lower than PS5 or Xbox Series. It's not terrible. Like, it's definitely enough for 4K 60. I mean, HDMI 2.0 was enough for 4K 60, and that has less bandwidth. But like, it's a little bit underwhelming to get this like in 2025, and this really screams to me that this product should have really launched in like the holiday season of 2023, like going into early 2024. Mid 2025, it either should have been a little bit cheaper, but I guess market will decide if it's fairly priced, or it should have actually had some newer features.
And that's it for here. This is a wall plug.
Also, the screen I guess we'll get to it when he turns it on.
Single USB-C port on that.
60-watt charger, nice. Unfortunately, you kind of have to have two chargers with a Switch because you probably want one always connected to your wall and going into your dock. And then you probably want something extra like for your regular day-to-day life. So, but since most of us do have smartphones, and most smartphones these days are USB-C, and a lot of chargers are USB-C, you should be fine.
USB Type-C cable. So that's your charger right here. Here's your little hub to attach both Joy-Con.
This one does not charge your Joy-Con, so that is still like a $30 extra purchase, which is such a waste of plastic because anybody who buys the charging one will just forever ignore this one, unless maybe their charging one breaks at some point. But at that point, you're much more likely to just be switching to a new system already.
Last but not least, the dock with the fans in it that does 4K out to the TV.
Yep.
With this new shape. I think first thing I want to do is just attach the Joy-Cons. That's the thing that I miss. When I first got to see those magnetic Joy-Cons, it's just so satisfying.
Sure.
This little mechanism here that pops a Joy-Con.
So it's now magnet-based rather than having this rail where you just slide it onto. These buttons are actually made out of magnets, so out of metal, so they can be attached to the magnets inside the system. And then you have your port here where those pins basically make it a hardwire connection.
Off the switch. It attaches
makes very satisfying sound,
well.
and you have the little like lever to like just connect the
nice.
magnet.
I kind of wonder how durable these pins are, if they're gonna break. I've been told
Nintendo actually, I believe, made like an explainer video saying that they had hoped to have magnetic Joy-Cons all the way back to the Switch 1, but it simply wasn't quite possible because they had a much quicker turnover from the Wii U to the Switch than they had initially planned because the Wii U became a full-on failure.
Have a little bit of give on purpose so that if you do knock up against it or drop it or something, it won't instantly break. Now these here are the little bumpers because you might actually end up using these a little bit more often, at least if the games support the new feature where the Joy-Cons can be...
You see, by the way, how large that trigger is? On Sony, that would be an R2 trigger. Right, just give it analog functionality, my God.
As a mouse, these little things, they're also made of plastic, a little bit of give to them, but they're still pretty sturdy. And they attach to the Joy-Cons themselves. So, if I throw this bumper on here, just like that, hooks on the bottom, and there you go. So there's your Joy-Cons as mice, and also with the bumpers on if you wanted to...
As mouses. The plural of keyboard mouse is not mice.
And hold your controller. Everybody's used to this experience. But I have some other unboxings to get to, so I'm gonna do these too. Let's do the camera first. So some of you may remember Nintendo's Connect event where they showed this new camera. Basically, while you're doing gameplay, you hit this new...
It sounded to me as if he said Nintendo Kinect event, you know, like the Xbox Kinect. Which maybe that was like a Freudian slip because he was like having a camera in front of him. What's interesting to me with the camera is some people say it's an outright gimmick, which I guess it is, but I always complain about gimmicks when it comes to gaming systems. I mean, none of this is really necessary. A lot of this is gimmicks. That doesn't mean it's bad. My question is, we already had the PlayStation 2 iToy. We had Xbox Kinect and PlayStation Move. We had the Wii like controls, like with the Wii mode, like the motion controls and everything. Like, I just wonder how much are we actually gonna get in terms of like camera stuff. We already lost stuff from the IR cameras on the Switch 1, right? Actually, on the Joy-Con on the lower side here, I believe it has an IR camera. So for some games, for example, like I believe it was 1-2 Switch, like there was a game where you would be like eating a burger and you'll be like doing this with your mouth, and the IR camera would be like measuring how often you open and close your mouth and how many hamburgers that meant you ate. I don't need to tell you that this wasn't like a big success. So, and even with this camera, like I wonder, like even just the way a lot of living rooms are built. Like I know it's a very wide angle camera, but like it's gonna really have trashy quality in so many ways.
C button. And it opens this share menu, and it's supposed to be this much more social console where you can...
Yeah, and it's gonna be locked behind a paywall. So for now, you can have the chat system for free, including up to chatting with a few people, both video and audio, and even sharing their screens. Obviously, because that would require a lot of system resources. I believe these videos are like limited to like, what, 10 FPS? I've heard some people say it's 8 or 12, so I'm just going to give you the middle one. But yeah, I assume, I mean, if you think about that, it's like a 60 FPS thing, right? That you have like your own stuff and potentially 4 videos down below. I guess that's like one way for the system to not be completely overrun with it. Need too much extra memory, need too much extra GPU and CPU power.
Share your gameplay with other people at the same time, or even share a video feed of your face which is overlaid over your gameplay to someone else who's playing at
for
the same
example,
time.
in Mario
Could be cool. I
Kart
don't even know
World,
if you might be able to live
you'll be
stream
able to
that
have
feed.
like your
I'm not
head
exactly sure if
floating
you wanna
over
do that,
your
but
Mario Kart,
this is that tiny
over your
little camera.
cart.
And yeah, it's just as tiny and cute as I remember. And then another USB Type-C cable for that. There's this little bezel around the front that lets you
It's a
manually,
mechanical
physically
shutter.
open and close it. You got that? That's nice. So we got our Pro Controller here, which is going to be sick for some games. I don't know if I'm going to use this for Mario Kart World, but here is your $85 Pro Controller. USB Type-C cable to USB Type-A on the other
Yeah,
end.
which makes no sense. That to me just means they probably like reused cables they had. This is so stupid. You have USB-C to USB-C from the camera to the system. You have USB-C to C from the charger to the system. And now suddenly your controller needs a USB-A to C? Nah.
Oh, it's kind of heavy. It's got some weight to it
Yep.
that I didn't actually expect. Everything else is obviously mostly plastic, and so is this controller, but it does have this like central weight where I'm sure battery and haptics all are. So, okay, Switch 2, I'm gonna put these Joy-Cons back on and fire it up for the first
He looks so cute when he does these things. Like it's not the enthusiasm of a child, but it's like some of the carefulness of a child. Almost, I assume he has some kind of partnership here with Nintendo. Probably not sponsored, but maybe some other things. And he probably doesn't want to say anything bad. Or there's. Because I haven't actually watched the video further than this, will he like put on like a D-brand skin on it or something like that? Because that's what I see from a lot of unboxings. That's how a lot of stuff is getting sponsored these days.
That's so much faster than before. Also, the dock here is nice because you can just, ideally, pop it in.
I mean, that's
There's a little bit of
exactly how it
wiggle,
was
a little bit
before.
of
But yeah,
give.
it's wiggly, I assume. So the cooling has actually some space. And the part of the original Switch was actually that it got scratched really easily inside the dock. So by the Switch OLED, Nintendo gave a little bit more room between your system and the actual dock.
It's not too bad. This is the Switch 1 dock,
Oh my God, I'll need
which
to
didn't
like...
really have any give at all. So I'm a little surprised to see so much wiggle. I think it's about time to start playing some games. Power button.
Okay, so he's turning it on. You can already see... Will it show? Okay, it shows a little bit, not too much. You can see that the screen is glowing a little bit, right? At least you can see that it's distinct from the black bezel around it. This is not a mini LED screen. This is not an OLED screen. This is a standard IPS LCD panel. It technically supports HDR, though by not having individual backlight zones, well, I guess it has. Like, what would a screen like this have? Like 7 backlight zones usually, right? Or something like that. Those are not enough for HDR. And its brightness isn't really enough for, like, HDR really or HDR light. I've seen some people say it maxes out at roughly 400 nits. I've seen some people claim it's a bit closer to 500. That's really not great for an LCD. That's like one advantage that I would expect like the Switch 2 to have over like the Switch OLED, at least in brightness. It is a 120 hertz screen, but keep in mind, of course, that with this being like a pretty standard IPS panel and Nintendo not being known to like source the most premium components, plus it potentially attempting some form of HDR playback, I don't assume this will have the best response time, which again, this is a downside over the Switch OLED. I wouldn't be mentioning this if Nintendo hadn't made a better system before. I guess the upside here is that it's a 1080p screen rather than a 720p screen, and it's a 7.9-inch screen rather than like 7 inches. That means it has not just higher resolution, but also actually higher pixel density, because 1080p on 8 inches is still more pixels per inch than 720p is on a 7-inch display. That being said, if you're playing Nintendo Switch 1 games that haven't gotten any upgrade, right? you might get locked to like 720p max. In fact, a lot of games run lower, but then they might also have dynamic resolution, which the Switch 2 Power could help with. But you could have games maxing out at 720p on 8 inches on a non-native resolution panel, right, on 1080p, so it would have to be scaled 1.5x on each axis, instead of on the Switch OLED, where you do have 720p. In this case, you actually have a higher effective pixel density because you have 720p on 7 inches, and you have the screen resolution matching your content resolution. So I hope a lot of games will get upgraded, at least in terms of resolution. One thing that I had wished Nintendo would have allowed is to allow docked mode in portable, right? So taking Switch 1 games and basically saying, oh, you're running mobile, or you're running in handheld on Switch 1, or you're running in docked on Switch 1 on your TV. But if you detect a Switch 2 in handheld, make it look like you do the Switch 1 in docked. Now, that would potentially screw up some games, and some UI elements might not be the ideal size. But I guess it would be some workaround, because I assume the vast majority of games will not be updated to the Switch 2, at least not for free. So that would be a little bit of a workaround. I mean, Xbox has found a way to make games even higher refresh rate from older generations. So there clearly are some tools you can employ as a platform holder. So you see, the bezels are not actually that small. I don't quite understand why we getting no screen here. I mean, just for the aspect ratio, sure. I assume that where that pin is and stuff, where those pins and magnets are, maybe Nintendo didn't want to put the screen over that portion. But I don't get why we get asymmetrical like bezels between left, right, and top, bottom.
Speakers are bigger. It's crisp.
Yeah.
English. Yes.
The speakers have actually
Americas,
always
yes.
been pretty good
Except
for
the
like a
agreement.
product
Yes.
of this
Okay, about
cost.
to download update data. I heard about this day one update. You can continue setting it up while the update downloads. Sure. What time zone am I in? Okay.
The system is pretty responsive, so if you go, for example, on Nintendo Live, their channel, you'll find
in the future, not get the bundle
that
at
they
launch,
have
but
like
get
a
the
home
physical
screen
Mario Kart
and
World
settings
game.
app breakdown,
This is what
and
one of those
a
nice
store reaction, the
cartridges is
Nintendo eShop, and they show how much faster it all is in comparison to the Switch 1.
look like.
So the games, I do have a complaint here. So open it. Oh, that's good. That's good. Look at this. We have this tiny little cartridge, right? This portion would usually be for some kind of like information material. Now, in the olden days, that would be potentially even some kind of playthrough guide, or maybe it's some information on how the game was developed, or just some artwork from the developers and stuff like that. Now it's nothing. So why is this box so large? Well, one reason is because, well, some games actually still do come with this, but why make it so tall, right? In this case, I would much rather prefer a DS-like system, right? Where you could still fit like something about this size, but you would just have like a much more compact, much more premium feeling packaging. This is just a waste of space. It also means that more space gets wasted in transport when those games like are shipped to stores and to customers. And given that a lot of these games, now this is a full-on game on a 64 gigabyte cartridge, but given that a lot of Nintendo Switch 2 games are actually going to be on something called a game key card, so it doesn't actually hold any game data, it just is basically like an authentication key to download the game from the store. That's just so much wasteful shit, plastic for all of this.
So much plastic.
Okay.
This is a massive
okay,
package for
good.
this tiny little cartridge right here, but this is the game. Those are your pins.
Big pins.
There we go. MKBHD is logged in. Very nice. More users can be added if the system will be used by other people. Good to know. To Parrots and Guardians, set up your controls. It's like, don't have any cards to add, but I would if I did. And then to set up the complete at home. Great. First look at the home screen on the Switch 2. So I could obviously jump in and download an app or game right now, but I think the move is...
So obviously the upside of a full-on game cartridge with the full game on it is that you don't need to install it on the system, don't need to download anything, well, potentially a patch, and then maybe some data for like your save files and whatever, but it's really nothing in comparison to and this isn't even like a large game. This is around 20 gigabytes, but then you have games like Cyberpunk 2077, which will use up most of the space on like your 64 gigabyte cartridge.
Straight to Mario Kart World. Nice. Software update's available. It'll download now. But I'd like to start the software, please. It's me. Sorry, I should say, it's a me.
Nice.
This new
the bezels are actually like really too big in my opinion. My assumption is that this will be something that Nintendo actually sticks with. And that now there is one theory, and that's the good Nintendo theory, which is the only reason why Nintendo didn't give you at least an OLED screen version right now is because there simply wasn't quite an OLED screen that could get you variable refresh rate and was 1080p at about this size. So basically in 3 years or so, Nintendo will order those kinds of screens, be it Samsung, or LG, Japan Display, whatever, BOE from China. They might even have a new display controller at that point or whatever. And yeah, it will just do the same VR stuff, but on OLED, better HDR, better contrast ratio, better response times, better efficiency, all the benefits of OLED versus a traditional LCD panel. There is a bad Nintendo theory, which is they probably didn't even try to source an OLED screen for this. Instead, they will want to, in the future as well, differentiate that like first arrival device, first version of a new system from an eventual refresh, because Nintendo doesn't really like pro-like systems like the Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro, the PS5 Pro. They choose to differentiate like a mid-gen version like through a more efficient chip with longer battery life, or we saw with the Switch OLED, like an OLED screen. And my assumption is that the Switch OLED will also have slimmer bezels. It might be like an 8.2-inch screen, right? 1080p, VRR, right? And that's would be just a bit slimy to me, because you did make a Switch OLED a few years ago.
Screen.
You could have been like going to Samsung the very same day as you decided on making the Switch OLED and saying, you know what, these are about the plans we have for the Switch 2. Obviously, don't tell anyone about it. Could you make us that screen? Like, how many could you make us? At what price? Right? And we're gonna use that screen either for all Nintendo Switch 2s if you offer us a really great price, or we are gonna offer it for like a Nintendo Switch 2, I don't know, like a $600 version of this with 512 gigs of storage rather than 256, a more premium screen, something like that. Yeah, but they clearly did not do that. This is also one thing. This is the only major launch game. So this generation systems have not been the greatest when it comes to the launch lineup. I would argue the PS5 is undoubtedly the best out of all of them, with Xbox being undoubtedly the worst. Because Halo Infinite had to be delayed for still a year after the launch of the Xbox Series. It didn't really get a major first-party tentpole title for quite a while. Sony had some titles that weren't all quite as big. They had Demon's Souls, Spider-Man Miles Morales, They had Returnal a little bit later. The Switch will also have like a Donkey Kong Bonanza later in the year, actually later this summer, so it's not too long of a wait. But launching with only Mario Kart, even though obviously Mario Kart is a huge game and it's one of the best-selling titles ever, like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Switch, it's still a bit disappointing. Now, they did do the PlayStation thing, which is they upgraded a lot of their games from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2. Some of those updates, similar to Sony, are for free. Those are smaller resolution and frame rate changes, and some games have deeper changes that make them fully native Switch 2 games. They have the VRR support, even higher refresh rates, and stuff like that. These games usually cost $10 to upgrade. That's also very Sony-like, or $20 if that game also includes a little bit more content. So, for example, Kirby Forbidden World is a $20 upgrade because not only does it upgrade the game from a stupid 30 FPS lock to a 60 FPS lock, but also high resolution, high quality graphics, HDR, and it also gives you a big bonus level.
7.9-inch display looks way better. 120 hertz looks so much better.
Mario Kart World is not 120 hertz. I think it has a 120 FPS mode, but I'm not sure if that's the default.
Turn the speakers down. Okay, sorry, I'm getting carried away. What I should be doing is comparing it to the other Switches. So I'm gonna do that real quick, just because we actually have them all side by side. So this is
What's
the
up,
Switch 1,
Switches?
which is my Switch 1.
Or
it's also a
Switch
colorware Switch 1,
sleeve.
so that's why it looks a little different.
If you understand the reference.
Paint all over the Joy-Cons and the back, and it looks super sweet. But this is the old kickstand, and this is the old Switch 1 size. This is the new Switch kickstand,
Bless me.
and the new Switch size. The thickness is roughly the same.
It's actually exactly the same, at least when it comes to the main body.
But obviously, much bigger screen, much better looking screen, higher refresh rate, more storage, the whole deal. Obvious upgrade. But this is David's Switch OLED, which they did upgrade some other things on. Obviously, it's an OLED display, but it also has this full width kickstand. See, this is the difference that we're talking about. This is the Switch OLED on the bottom.
It looks much more vibrant, even from this perspective. Obviously, this is a much better panel than the original Switch, but even like the bezels are smaller in the Switch OLED.
Switch 2 on the top. And this happens so many times in like even the smartphone world and the tablet world, where we say, oh, you know, we're nerds, we're really pixel peeping, we really want to see a higher fidelity, better looking display. But at the end of the day, most people just want a bigger screen, and that's what the Switch 2 is delivering. We also fully expect, if we're being reasonable, there's probably going to be a Switch 2 OLED at some point in the next like 2 years or something.
And there's probably also going to be a Switch 2
I wouldn't be shocked when that shows
Lite.
up, and that's even more expensive, but that's a bigger OLED display that's also 120 hertz and looks amazing. And they might even do some other things that upgrade the console. Like, they weren't afraid of a new kickstand design and some other things for Switch OLED. But, yeah. Oh, God. I didn't actually think this through.
Tabletop mode.
That is fun. Yeah, these Joy-Cons are so much better than the old ones.
Primarily
They're
because they're
We
larger.
have them. We can actually do a direct comparison. You have to pull the little pin in, slot it up like that. And first of all, it's larger, which does make a difference. It's a little more ergonomic. But then also every single button is bigger. The joystick is bigger. I saw that there was a pre-installed screen protector on the Switch, and it's true. I can see it. I'm going to get a macro shot of it so you can see what I'm seeing.
Yep.
But they say don't remove it.
Yeah,
And
it's
now that I've
it's
seen-
very similar to what we get on like the foldable displays, right? It's technically a layer on top of the screen, but it's so firmly integrated. This device is basically designed to have this. I guess in an ideal scenario, that would mean if it gets scuffed up, at least maybe in a store you would be able to replace it. But like DIY repairs with Nintendo have been pretty bad. Even if the system is somewhat modular, like Nintendo's instructions are ass. Nintendo's providing of replacement parts is ass. Nintendo's providement of official repair tools is basically non-existent for the DIY market. Which again, I'm fine with a company treating it like that. I know for a while Apple treated DIYs in a similar way, but now that we have so many states and countries working or even already having do-it-yourself focus, right to repair laws and stuff like that, it's a little bit strange that the Switch 2 still launches and it doesn't have like any repair instruction, at least nothing that I've heard of. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me.
Instructions.
FRKM joining the stream. Hi, we are done for today with Apple topics. We are soon going to be wrapping this up, but hey, hopefully you will still enjoy the video afterwards. Hopefully you'll also leave a comment on the video afterwards.
Okay, I won't. But if you want to install one on top of it, that's cool too. Like dbrand has a Prism screen protector you can install on top of this one, and that will hold it and protect it.
I love how people keep bringing up dbrand as if it's like the only brand that does it. It's not even like the top choice when you go on like Amazon. When it comes to stuff like screen protectors, like it's always weird. Like there's a strong YouTube bias to like these specific things, like dbrand for like your device customizations, NordVPN when it comes to VPN software, Honey for a while until it turned out they were quite scammy and quite bad for money saving tools. Raid Shadow Legends for mobile games, right? And because a lot of these content creators don't actually interact too much with this stuff, like Marquez is not really applying too many screen protectors outside of his partnerships with dbrand, right? So he won't think of other brands here too.
Whatever's underneath. Now, one of the big Switch 2 talking points, which I mentioned in that last video, was that game that essentially acts as...
So that's the other launch game for the Switch 2.
A tutorial to learn about your Switch. Doesn't come with it. It's not free, and it's not here. But there are some
it's a $10 game
tutorial things, like how to use mouse controls. If I pop one of these off, select next and follow the on-screen guides, put the bumper on. Oh, there it is. Shows up immediately.
It also supports regular Bluetooth mouses. I'm sticking to it. I'm not calling it mice. So those ones should be way more ergonomic than this, but they obviously won't have the upside of dynamically switching from like controller mode to mouse mode. For example, when you look at games like the latest Metroid Prime one, Metroid Prime Beyond, I think, that one you can play it as a controller, and then once you put it on the table or even like on your leg, it will recognize, oh, you want to use one of them as a mouse, and it will switch to that.
So I don't know if you can see that, but I am using this as a controller, and then I'm also able to scroll inside windows, which is kind of nice. And then of course I can select.
Yeah, obviously though,
top button.
like,
so it works pretty well. I think there's gonna be a couple of games.
Yeah, it looks just so small. Like I'm not the biggest gamer or anything, right? But obviously you guys know I have the MX Master 3S for Mac. It's literally written down below. And what I find funny is just like, this isn't even like a gaming mouse, right? But it's very ergonomic, very good to use, very well integrated with Mac. It has additional controls and everything. Obviously, scrolling has like a dedicated scroll wheel. In fact, that scroll wheel is actually customizable, right? Like now it doesn't have any like interruptions. You can just scroll the wheel, but when I click this button, right, it's more of a stepped thing, right? More like Apple's Digital Crown, right? What Apple Digital Crown does with haptics in your device, and it just like this just doesn't look ergonomic. And mouse input really lives and dies to me with how ergonomic it is. Like there is a reason why so many people, even for non-gaming, hate the Magic Mouse. So yeah, I'm not sure this will be a big success, but hey, maybe it will bring more mouse and keyboard support to more console games.
That do immediately support this out the box, but it's probably not something a lot of them are expecting to use. Like I did that wheelchair soccer game when I was doing a demo when I first tried to switch to it. It worked pretty well, but yeah, we'll see what other games end up using that. So for those wondering what the rest of the home screen stuff looks like, because this is also something we haven't seen yet, looks pretty familiar. You've got your picture up at the top because that's your account, and I'm sure I'll blur my friend code so nobody spams me. But then of course your games, and then underneath, game chat's in there, settings are in here. I can go to, let's see, can I change my display refresh rate? TV resolution is automatic, but up to 4K, which is great. So it doesn't look like I can decide to go down.
Screen burn-in protection is a funny one. I guess that's for OLED TVs, and maybe kind of like a relic from the Switch OLED being an option.
To 60 hertz. This is for just TV. Yeah, I feel like these new Joy-Cons are almost as much of an upgrade as the new screen. Just having these huge new buttons, the whole Joy-Con being bigger, ergonomically it's better, the haptics are better. I should probably drop the sound a little bit, but yeah, it is much better to game on an individual Joy-Con with the new ones. So if you're thinking about Switch 2, oh, is that really that much of an upgrade? Is it that different to game on it? It's gonna feel different because of the Joy-Cons just as much as the screen. So here's all three Switches all lined up next to each other. Switch 1, OG, Switch OLED.
Okay, I think that's about it for Marquez. I think that's a high quality unboxing, even just from a quality level of the video, right? Obviously, he didn't put quite in the effort as he did it, like the crazy intro of the Galaxy S25 Edge review, for example. But yeah, I think he showed off the differences quite well. I don't think he has a great understanding of the underlying technology. Down the road, I would like to talk to you more about the Nintendo NVIDIA-based processor inside, which is like not an X2, right? I don't think it has a specific name, at least according to Nintendo, but it's 8/7 nanometer from Samsung. It's based on a roughly 2-generation-old GPU architecture. It supports mesh shading, obviously, hardware-accelerated ray tracing. It supports DLSS, which they even call DLSS. That's interesting to me, that Nintendo lets like a PC-based brand from NVIDIA be basically like overriding their own branding on the system, but I guess that's probably because most people don't really care. Yeah, the power level should be roughly comparable to a Steam Deck in that regard. While the Steam Deck technically has like a more efficient node, at this point it uses a 6-nanometer chip. It uses a way less efficient architecture. This is ARM-based versus the Steam Deck being based on a Zen 2 x86 CPU, and it's based on RDNA 2, which even back in the day was like surprisingly inefficient compared to, unless you look at its implementation on PS5 and the Xbox Series, but that's because it gets customized and it gets like the driver specifically written for it. But even like the 8-nanometer Ampere was like pretty good in comparison to RDNA 2 in many ways, even though that was one like 7 nanometer. So it shouldn't be terrible battery life, but obviously it has a 5,000 milliampere hour battery. The Steam Deck has a 55 watt-hour battery, which is roughly almost 3 times 5,000 milliampere hours here, converts to around 20 watt hours. So that's a lot less. If you look at even higher end PC gaming handhelds, you'll look at devices with 75 and even 80 watt hours of battery. Granted, those devices are also designed to consume a lot more power. The Switch processor in handheld is kind of designed to max out at roughly 10 watts. That would give it like a 2-hour battery life. In a lot of smaller games, it probably goes down to anywhere around like 5, 6, 7 watts. So that's enough for like 5-ish hours at best in some scenarios. if you really push it to like an indie game that might not even run at full resolution or something like that. So it's really not a high-end system, but I guess a lot of people will just care that it plays Nintendo games better than the previous Nintendo systems. But it's launching in a much more competitive market than the Switch 1 did, right? The Switch 1 was the beginning of the renaissance of handhelds. The Switch 2 now launches in a market that has a lot more handhelds to compete with. And in a few years, roughly around 2027 to early 2028, we should be getting what I internally consider the PS6 Portable, which is basically a Sony-based handheld that should roughly have the power of a PS5 in some ways, like definitely in terms of ray tracing, definitely in terms of CPU power, but then it also has like maybe a little bit less GPU power, but it also is much more efficient on a much newer architecture, much newer node. And with that, it actually will match the PS6. So if we assume that, for example, the PS6 has RDNA 5 or 6, or at this point it will be called UDNA, then the PlayStation handheld will have that, but with fewer compute cores, but with the same ray tracing capabilities, the same AI upscaling, right? If it has a Zen 6 CPU, maybe with 12 cores, then a handheld would probably have 8 cores and clock them a little bit lower. Right? That is going to be a lot more high-end than this. And judging from the Switch, this is a system that Nintendo plans to sell for 7 to 8 years. Now, there have been precedent for Nintendo to update their systems much faster when the need arrives, or at least lower the prices like crazy. So I hope that a much more competitive market, more pressure from both the mid-range and the upper range will make this either cheaper or will allow for a quicker turnover than we had from the Switch 1 to now the Switch 2. And that's about it for everything I wanted to say. It's been now a 2-hour stream, which I definitely did not expect. Thank you to anyone who joined. You guys know the drill: subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. But you also know the preparation for next week and WWDC coming next Monday on June 9th. I'll let you know exactly, both through a channel post and through posts on social media, including Discord, Blue Sky, Threads, when exactly I'm going live that day. I assume it will be half an hour to an hour before DubDub. So I still have some work, but I'm taking it easy that week. So maybe half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, something like that. Then during the stream, I'm not going to be obviously showing you the DubDub stream. I'm going to be showing you my face reactions. So if you feel like watching it, and then afterwards we'll discuss everything for like another hour or so. But also for the next day and 2 and 3, I'll be basically live every day at around my usual 6 to 7 p.m. and then for about 1.5 to 2 hours. So please, subscribing and hitting the notification bell here specifically actually helps you stay up to date on what's coming next week. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to all of this. Hope you had fun with everything from DubDub leaks to iPhone 17 rumors to Switch 2 unboxing. Let's see if we have anything new here. No. Hopefully we have nothing new here. Okay, no, that's mostly a rumor. Or is it? No, here's why. That's just speculation stuff from 9 to 5 Mac. They like to speculate, just as I do, but it's not a concrete like Mark Gurman rumor or something like that. Yeah, thank you so much for joining today. Hope you'll be tuning in next week, whether at DubDub or during the week, because maybe you just want to watch DubDub by yourself, which I fully understand. Yeah, really looking forward to this. As always, let me also know what else else you would like me to react to, though I assume those requests will be pretty small next week, given that we have all the dub coverage ahead of us. Looking forward to all of this. Thank you guys so much again. This is Mark Tech tuning out. And you're getting Big Mark at the end, because I know some of you are strangely in love with me being full screen. Bye.